Scuderia Ferrari put together a perfect weekend in Australia, with Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc securing the team's 86th 1-2 finish, its 244th victory. It picked up the maximum 44 points thanks to the Monegasque driver also delivering the additional point for the race fastest lap. It means that for a 59th season, the Maranello team has at least one win to its name and is now just 4 points behind the championship leader, while Charles is the same distance behind Max Verstappen in the drivers. Carlos Sainz is 11 points down, having missed the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix after being diagnosed with appendicitis. Unbelievably, the Spaniard seemed to shake off any effects of his appendectomy 16 days ago and immediately put Max Verstappen under pressure. On lap 2, when the Dutchman was in difficulty, Carlos Sainz made the most of it to get ahead and then mustered all his physical and mental strength to keep focused, running at an incredibly consistent pace. He also was one of the best when it came to managing his tires. He did 3 stints, starting on the medium before pitting on laps 16 and 41 to take on hards both times. He pitted after his closest pursuers and always had the situation under control, only easing off when he was in the 3rd sector on the penultimate lap, when the race was neutralized after a spectacular crash for George Russell, from which he emerged unscathed. As the icing on the cake, Carlos won the fan vote for Driver of the Day. Charles Leclerc also produced a very strong drive at the 5.278-kilometer Albert Park circuit in Melbourne to take a well-deserved 2nd place, which is very important in terms of the battle with Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. Having started 4th, he pulled off a perfect undercut on lap 9 to get ahead of Lando Norris. Then in the final stint, he finished the job, fending off the Englishman who was on tires that were 6 laps newer than his own. In the end, he also ensured he picked up another valuable point by setting the fastest race lap. Analyzing the telemetry data of the 2 Ferrari drivers during the 3rd round of the 2024 Formula One Championship, it is quite evident how Charles Leclerc's race was compromised from the early laps of the Melbourne race. The Monegasque driver indeed had the overall pace to contend for victory with his Maranello teammate Carlos Sainz, but a different strategy undertaken to beat the McLaren of Lando Norris and secure the 1-2 finish prevented him from doing so. This strategy was rightly adopted in our opinion by the Ferrari pit wall, given the race pace of the McLaren MCL38 cars, which was just 0.2 slower than the Ferrari SF-24, which means it would have been very difficult for the Monegasque driver to overtake his opponents on the track. Let's analyze the graph related to the telemetry data, which compares Carlos Sainz's lap times highlighted by the red line with those of Charles Leclerc, indicated by the white line, lap after lap in the Australian Grand Prix. We'll compare the 3 different stints of the race. In the first one, highlighted by the green line overlay, Charles Leclerc was chasing Lando Norris to secure the 2nd position. The Monegasque driver's less-than-perfect result in the qualifying session on Saturday significantly influenced his pace in the early phase of the Melbourne race. In the attempt to overtake Lando Norris, which was unsuccessful on track due to the impressive pace of the McLaren MCL38, the Ferrari man demanded too much from the tires, resulting in an earlier pit stop. The undercut decided by the Maranello strategists proved efficient and allowed Ferrari's number 16 to gain a position against the British driver. But at the same time, this move compromised the rest of his race. Charles Leclerc managed the tires for most of the race, especially in the 2nd stint, highlighted by the blue line overlay, with his Ferrari race engineer, Xavier Marcos Padros, repeatedly advising him to focus on himself rather than on the possibility of closing the gap to Carlos Sainz and fighting for the lead. The Spaniard, on the other hand, had the advantage of having tires which were fresher by about 6-7 laps, both in the 2nd and 3rd part of the Australian Grand Prix. An advantage that, let it be clear, he earned with a better qualifying result than his teammate, and with a masterful first stint in managing the medium tires. However, when both could push equally, namely in the final part of the race, highlighted by the yellow line overlay, the feeling is that Charles Leclerc had slightly more pace. After a few laps of managing the last set of tires, in fact, the Monegasque driver pushed to keep Lando Norris at bay and consolidate Ferrari's 1-2 finish at the Albert Park circuit. In doing so, however, he also managed to demonstrate that he had at least the same pace as Carlos Sainz, if not slightly better, as also evidenced by their fastest lap, where Charles Leclerc was about 0.2 quicker. Therefore, from this analysis based on reliable telemetry data, it emerges that Charles Leclerc could have contested for victory if he had started in front of Carlos Sainz, or just behind his teammate, presumably managing the Pirelli tires in the same way as number 55. In short, the obstacle named Lando Norris and McLaren was the real determining factor in a potential battle for victory, which was a matter to settle only between the two Ferrari drivers once Max Verstappen was forced to retire in the early stages of the race due to brake disc problems that affected his Red Bull RB20 and put an end to his streak of race wins.